Well, and I'm the director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. This is a university-wide program here in DC, focusing on improving health and health policy through evidence-based policy solutions. I'm also a former commissioner of the FDA and receive and utilize information on pharmaceutical quality to guide decision-making. Quality is a dynamic and evolving issue, and there might be questions around where the product is manufactured and what is happening to the drug as it moves through the supply chain, which is increasingly becoming global in reach. This workshop and the ensuing discussions are intended to provide a timely opportunity to convene the stakeholder community to better understand these challenging issues surrounding pharmaceutical quality and to hear from stakeholders, including patients, providers, payers, and buyers. We're very pleased to say that all of those perspectives are represented with us here today. The FDA's leadership will present some of their views and provide some important updates. We'll also have some time to take questions and comments from attendees as part of the moderated discussion today. Now, I expect there will be some opinions about what seems to be working and what may not be working as well as people would like, and that's okay. Systematic challenges can only be solved through a community of dedicated stakeholders working together, and throughout the morning, we look forward to teasing out possible approaches and next steps to advance progress on pharmaceutical quality and perceptions about it. We're looking forward to having a robust discussion, and we really appreciate all your interest and earnestness in approaching this work. So I want to spend a couple of minutes running through the day's agenda and a few housekeeping items. We'll start the day with opening remarks from Keegan Linehan, who will provide an overview of FDA's perspectives on these issues. Our first session will then focus on the concept of pharmaceutical quality and its importance. The second session of the day will focus on the state of pharmaceutical quality and patient and provider perceptions about quality. Then this meeting will adjourn at 11:30 a.m. Before I turn to the opening remarks, just a few of those housekeeping items. I just want to remind everyone this is a public meeting that's also being webcasted online. The record of the webcast will be available on the Duke Margolis website after the event. This meeting is intended to spur discussion. We're not looking to achieve consensus today, but rather to bring out important perspectives and a variety of perspectives on these issues. And to that end, we've reserved time throughout the day for participants in the audience to make comments and ask questions during moderated discussion. We'd ask you to keep your comments to 2 minutes or less so that we have the chance to hear from as many people as possible during the discussion today. So please feel free also to help yourself to coffee and beverages during the morning. They're located to the back of the room, and we look forward to a frank and earnest and constructive discussion on these important topics. So now I'd like to turn to our first speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce Keegan Linehan, who will provide opening remarks to set the context for today's discussion. Keegan is the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where she oversees the daily management of the agency and leads the agency's activities on major cross-cutting initiatives. Keegan, thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you, Duke Margolis, for hosting today's meeting, and to our CEDAR colleagues for inviting me to participate. One of the most enjoyable responsibilities and opportunities I have in my position at the FDA is to support the work of the agency's many scientists, researchers, and regulators in their efforts to stay at the forefront of the extraordinary scientific and technological advancements that help to define the world of healthcare today. The impact of these advances cut across the entire healthcare industry, affecting healthcare facilities, medical providers, and most directly, patients. As we focus on the issues today, it is important to keep in mind that the decisions the FDA must make in this area are rarely easy ones. They generally involve balancing of the risks and benefits to patients. But while these decisions can be tough, they are always sound. They are based and rely on the integrity and expert staff, a comprehensive, modern, and transparent process, and perhaps most importantly, solid science and rigorous data. There's another important piece to this puzzle, and a critical resource for our ability to maintain drug quality and make more informed decisions. This is our continuing engagement with stakeholders. For us to make fully informed decisions about drug quality, we must interact with and listen to all stakeholder groups. This ensures that we can understand and appreciate each group's unique perspectives and challenges. It further helps our efforts to make sure the public fully understands and maintains high confidence in our ability to meet our responsibility for safety. I'm delighted today that the event involves a diverse group of stakeholders, including patients, patient groups, healthcare providers and professionals, academics, purchasers, payers, and others. Each of you bring an important and distinct set of concerns related to drug quality, and it is an FDA priority to hear and consider your perspectives to help inform our decision-making. While leading the FDA's interagency task force on drug shortages last year, I saw firsthand how listening sessions like those scheduled for later today are critical to FDA's decision-making. While you'll be hearing more about the task force in the report later today, our charge was to seek and identify root causes and enduring solutions to shortages. And this was not a simple task. The listening sessions we held as a part of our quest for root causes and enduring solutions gave us valuable insight into ways market participants assess and respond to pending shortages, including the role of intermediaries such as PBMs, GPOs, and distributors, current contracting practices, information available to drug buyers about the reliability of supply from manufacturers, and how limited information there is about the impacts of shortages have on patients and the healthcare system. What we learned from those discussions and the outcomes of that report has spurred the agency to have additional conversations like the ones we are having here today. Shortages of medically necessary medications have a significant impact on patient treatment options, requiring practitioners to make difficult decisions that can compromise care. One of the report's sobering findings was that problems in quality triggered over 60% of drugs that went into shortage. At the FDA, we try to strive to minimize the number of shortages, as well as the frequency of how often we must make difficult decisions about quality of a product that may affect the supply. Of course, we'd much rather there was no potential quality risk or supply disruptions. That's what patients and their providers deserve. Quality is of special importance to patients and the public, and so is the agency's role in helping ensure the quality, that is, the safety and efficacy of the drugs that are on the market today. This responsibility is at the heart of FDA's mission to protect and promote the health of the American public. The quality of pharmaceutical products has been a topic of great interest for several years, and there's a number of reasons why. Part of it relates directly to the extraordinary innovation that has occurred recently due to advances in science. These advances have led to new treatments and cures, but much remains to be done, and the demand for products and answers from patients remains high. Another reason is the challenging nature of the drug supply. With the emergence of global markets, supply chains have become increasingly complex. With it, the challenges that FDA face in meeting our responsibility to ensure the safety and efficacy of the drugs and medical devices for patients in this country have only grown. At the same time, our efforts to strengthen the integrity of supply chains as products move through the system has also increased. The result of both legislative changes we are implementing and unprecedented scientific and technological applications that help us ensure the safety of the American public. Patient safety is at the core of FDA's public health mission, and guaranteeing reliable patient access to safe and effective medicines requires maintaining a transparent, secure, and high-quality supply chain for drug distribution and delivery. Additionally, the agency has focused on increasing accessibility of prescription drugs through greater competition. The FDA implemented the Drug Competition Action Plan to encourage a robust, timely market competition for generic drugs, and also a Biosimilars Action Plan to encourage development and adoption of biosimilar drugs. These plans have led to several actions to remove potential barriers to generic competition and biosimilar drug development and help patients get access to the medicines they need at affordable prices. But as we work to increase our efficiencies, promote competition, and speed the development of these drugs when possible, I assure you that the agency is not compromising on the quality standards in the assessment and the evaluation of these products. Our decisions are always science and risk-based, and the FDA maintains a gold standard of scientific rigor. Yet as we strive to approve more quality medicines that are safe and effective, how can we also ensure that there is access to these medications? You heard me say earlier that over 60% of shortages are due to quality issues. Most of our findings of the shortages report were around the underlying factors that cause those quality issues. I hope today's discussion will build on the report's findings and provide more solutions as to how stakeholders can ensure the necessary reliability in the drug supply chain. Our goal today is to provide you with a better understanding of the importance of pharmaceutical quality, a greater appreciation for the challenges that the agency faces, and more information about some of the ways your input can support and guide us. We all desire the same result, the assurance that patients have access to safe, effective, quality drugs they need when they need them. We look forward to working with you to achieve this goal, and I hope you have a productive and successful meeting. Thank you.
Keegan, thanks very much for those opening comments to get us going. We're going to move straight on into the first session of the day, where we'll discuss the concept of pharmaceutical quality and its important and FDA's role in regulating pharmaceutical quality in more detail. Again, we'll hear from some of the FDA leadership in this regard, then some time for questions and comments from those of you who are with us today. So I'm happy to introduce our speakers for this first session. We'll ask them to come on up. Patrizia Cavazzoni is the Deputy Director for Operations at FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In this important position at CDER, she has provided strategic leadership related to regulatory and scientific programs. And also Michael Kopsha, who's Director of the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality at CDER FDA. Michael's office is responsible for assuring the availability of quality medicines for the American public through assessment, inspection, surveillance, research, and policy. OPQ contributes to the assessment of nearly every type of human drug marketing application, including new drug applications, abbreviated new drug applications, and biologics license applications. That's brand, generic, and biologics as well. So we're going to have brief presentations from both Patrizia and then Michael, and then open up for questions. So Patrizia, thank you very much. You can, which way would you rather? Okay.
Good morning, and welcome to today's session. We're greatly looking forward to hearing your views and feedback on this very important aspect of drug regulation and a very important aspect of assuring safety and effectiveness of drugs. I'm Patrizia Cavazzoni. As have you heard, I work at CDER. I'm the Deputy Center Director for Operations, and in my role, I really have a cross-cutting role supporting the Center Director, Dr. Woodcock, and working closely with the offices. There we go. So pharmaceutical quality is fundamental to the safety and effectiveness of drug, and it's what ensures that drugs on the market are safety and effective in a continuous fashion, meaning that we expect safety manufacture a consistent quality of drugs. This is not sort of a cross-sectional aspect of drug quality. And when quality goes wrong, everything can go wrong, and quality issues can have a fundamental impact on the safety of drugs, but also on their effectiveness. So as we improve patient access to medicine, and as you heard from Keegan, FDA is very committed through several initiatives to expand access to medicines for all patients. We cannot sacrifice quality. So what is a definition of pharmaceutical quality? Well, there's many definitions, but one definition is assuring that every dose is safe and effective, free of contaminants and defects. And what pharmaceutical quality is also an element of patient's confidence in the drug, and a patient's confidence that quality is going to be there with every single dose, not only today, but also tomorrow and so on. So the concept of consistency is very important when it comes to pharmaceutical quality. So how does CEDAR regulate pharmaceutical quality? It is a multimodal approach that entails more than one office. The three offices that are fundamentally focused in this area are the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and you have a strong contingent here today, the Office of Regulatory Affairs, who contain the Inspectorate, and the Office of Compliance, who focus on enforcement actions. The regulation of quality and the evaluation and surveillance of quality span the full spectrum of the life cycle of a drug. And it starts in the pre-market period with every single application, be that a generic application or a new drug application, entails an evaluation of the facility and an evaluation of the quality control and quality standards of the drug. And then once a drug is on the market, there is continuous surveillance of quality through a number of modalities, including inspections, including research and testing, enforcement, which is a significant part of how we regulate the space. Policy is a very important aspect, including our working with international regulatory agencies as part of a global international regulatory community that establishes international standards for quality. We also do a lot of outreach, such as this instance, to patients, to manufacturers, and all the stakeholders, many stakeholders in our environment. And we are also, we really strive to achieve a high level of engagement with our stakeholders. There's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight in this instance is that when it comes to enforcement, FDA does not have the authority to mandate recalls with the exception of controlled substances. And that's something that has been debated in the news, or at least highlighted in the news recently. This is something that is quite different from, let's say, countries such as Singapore or Switzerland or so on, where the regulatory authority has the authority to mandate recalls. You've heard from Keegan that FDA is very committed to improving patient access, and that includes, among many other modalities, a strong commitment to our generic drug program and expanding the access and lowering the price of drugs through facilitating the development of generic drugs. With the expansion of the global supply chain, we are seeing more and more of active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished drug products that are manufactured outside of the US, including China and India. We are very conscious of the increasing complexity of the supply chain and the increasing globalization of the supply chain. But regardless of that complexity, we expect consistent quality regardless of where the drug or the ingredients are manufactured. And we do a lot of work to ensure that the integrity of the supply chain is maintained in this increasingly complex global environment. At the same time, we are conscious of the fact that their innovation can be stifled by complexity of the regulatory process. And one area where we see increasing complexity is through lack of harmonization or convergence across multiple countries, because manufacturers find themselves having to obey very different processes across major geographies, and this is of course very time-consuming and not necessarily work that is going high-value work. And so we're doing a lot of work here, and we have Teresa Mullen today in the audience to with our global regulatory partners to find ways to streamline and simplify those processes that are causing more sort of divergence across regulatory agencies, and try to strive to more harmonization. Quality is a partnership that entails many more stakeholders beyond FDA. And if FDA were alone to try to assure product quality, we would, frankly, fail. So we really need all of the aspects of the quality ecosystem to work with us and work across the system to ensure drug quality. And this includes patients, payers, purchasers, providers, hospitals, international regulators, manufacturers, and so on. And so we're really delighted today that we will have an opportunity to hear from stakeholders that we don't hear from as frequently as we do, let's say, patients or manufacturers in particular. We spend a lot of time, obviously, regulating industry, which is what we do. But we're really looking forward to this opportunity today and to have a robust discussion. So you've heard from Keegan about the drug shortage report, which FDA issued after several months of study at the request of Congress. And this report highlighted a number of sort of things in the environment. So what we learned, as you heard from Keegan, is that the majority of drug shortages are caused by quality problems, over 60%. Not surprisingly, over 60% of drug shortages are in generic drugs, but that's not surprising because over 90% of the drugs that are prescribed are generic. So that in itself is something that we would expect. And last but not least, disappointing to us is that we observed that over 60% of generic drugs that are approved are not marketed, which further compounds drug shortages. We also spent a lot of time to identify root causes of drug shortages. And today I'm going to focus on the second. The first and the third one are more sort of economic in nature. I am in no way minimizing, and they're very important. But because of the focus of today, I would like to really highlight the second root cause, which is an observation that the market doesn't recognize and reward manufacturers for quality. The market tends to gravitate towards low prices and the most competitive prices, and the quality of the product and the reliability of the supply, which, as you heard earlier, is intrinsically tied to quality, is not rewarded through preferential pricing, for instance. In particular, manufacturers are not rewarded for putting in place what we refer to as mature quality systems, which are an aspect, a fundamental aspect of ensuring quality and reliable supply. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about quality management systems. And first, I'll try to sort of define what a quality system is. A quality system is a collection of processes and procedures that are needed to consistently establish and maintain quality in any manufacturing environment or any clinical environment. In this case, we're focusing on a quality management system that are put in place in manufacturing facilities and in manufacturing systems. And so historically, we have focused on characterizing quality management system using current good manufacturing practices, or CGMPs. And these are very important. They're a set of criteria that characterize and define attributes to evaluate quality. As a result of these criteria, manufacturers obviously have to meet certain standards, but they have also fallen into more of a reactive mode. That is more of a check-the-list approach to quality that is very focused on passing the next inspection. So what differentiates a basic quality management system from a strong and mature quality management system? Well, a strong and mature quality management system is proactive in nature, takes a continuous approach to monitoring quality and reacting in a continuous way to changes or disruptions or anomalies in the quality management system. And it focuses on understanding the performance of the system in continuous and in real times. And so a mature quality management system has to have, for instance, established metrics that will allow monitoring of the system. And some of you may have heard of FDA's quality management system, which is an element of quality maturity. And also, even more importantly, a mature quality system is founded on a strong quality culture. And that quality culture entails having senior management as high as possible in the chain, walking the talk. That is probably the most important ingredient in a strong quality culture. Not only did we look at root causes, but we also studied potential solutions. And again, because today we're talking about product quality, I'm going to be focusing on the second of three enduring solutions that we have highlighted in this report. And that is a proposal to put in place a rating system to incentivize quality management maturity. Am I talking about a consumer report system? That would be a very simplistic way of viewing this, but we're really talking about a way to, and a set of attributes that would allow the various stakeholders who need to understand the quality of products to be able to differentiate those products that are manufactured in facilities that have a more mature quality system versus others that may have more basic quality systems. And so this rating, if we were to move towards a rating system, purchasers, payers, hospitals, even patients would have more transparency and visibility over the characteristics and the level of quality maturity of the facility from which a drug would be supplied. FDA is also walking the talk when it comes to investing in quality, and I'm going to talk about two examples of our strong focus on investing in quality. The first one is investment in technology, and the second one is investment in improving the inspection process. So let's talk about technology first. This is one example of our substantial investment in technology, and we have been very fortunate to receive significant funding from Congress starting in 2019 that has really been able to allow us to ramp up our ability, our investment in modernizing our technology systems. And in this instance, we have and very germane to quality, we are putting in place a knowledge-aided assessment and structured application system to evaluate the quality section of the application. Remember that I said earlier that we start our evaluation of quality during the review of the application, and this is a way to make that review more efficient, more effective, and to allow us to find issues in a more efficient way. Today, we have reviewers who have to sift through thousands and thousands of PDF pages in order to identify the core issues of an application. So the system breaks apart all of these thousands and thousands of pages and allows the reviewer to focus on the more important aspects by creating a structured form that highlights all of the areas that we really need to focus on in the evaluation of quality. And moving forward, we're also proposing to have manufacturers submit their application in a structured fashion that would also further improve the way that we review the application, including achieving a greater consistency of the review, as well as being able to look across multiple applications really at the click of a button. And this is particularly important when we review generic applications because, as you know, one drug may have dozens, even hundreds of generic versions, and it's very important to be able to compare across all of those applications for the same drug. As I mentioned earlier, we're also investing in improving how we conduct inspections. We recognize that as we move towards quality maturity in facilities, we also have to do inspections differently. And so as a result of that, we have been working and implemented a new inspection protocol that has now so far been applied to sterile injectable inspections, and we actually close to 50% of our inspections of sterile injectable facilities are being conducted using this new protocol. And this protocol entails a standardized electronic inspection protocol, as well as a templated semi-automatic inspection report, again to focus the investigator on the areas that are important and to achieve greater consistency from inspection to inspection. And most importantly, this template guides the inspector to evaluate quality maturity indicators. So at the end of specific sections of the inspection, and the template, the investigator is prompted to elicit what the quality maturity indicators for particular elements of the quality management system. And so, as I said earlier, I really look forward to understanding and hearing your perspectives on how FDA can make better decisions related to drug qualities, and how can we help the public make better and more informed decisions about drug quality in drugs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks very much, Patrizia. Next is Michael.
Thanks. I'm just going to take a little bit of a different approach. I really don't like sitting down when I give presentations. Actually, typically I like to interact with the audience more so, but since space is a little bit tight, I'm going to stick to the podium today. My presentation, before I start, just to give you an idea, I am Mike Kopcha. Let me just get there. There we are. I head up the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality at CEDAR, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research within the FDA. The office was stood up in January of 2015, so the office itself is about 5 years old, so it's a relatively new office. So what I want to do, though, is to kind of ground you as we start talking about pharmaceutical quality, give you a little bit of a better understanding in terms of what we mean by pharmaceutical quality, but just as important, to give you an understanding of the office itself, kind of our responsibilities and some of the things we do to drive quality within the industry. From this slide, what I wanted to point out is that we have oversight and we monitor both domestic manufacturing sites as well as international manufacturing sites, which means we monitor manufacturing across the globe. Not only do we monitor quality across the globe, but we also want to be able to take a look at quality of all different product classes. So we get involved and we monitor drug classes around new drugs, biologics, generics, compounded drugs, over-the-counter or OTC drugs, as well as biosimilars. For those of you that are not familiar with biosimilars, I'm going to give you a very a brief definition of what that actually means, but it is by no means the exact definition, but for the purposes of this discussion and for today's meeting, biosimilars are basically generics of biologics. So just keep it that similar to give you an understanding. So you can see the office then does look at products across those classes of drugs and also across the life cycle of products. So we get involved in the development of those products, pre-marketing, which means before the drug gets to market. So we have to do our work at that stage as well. And then we get involved in post-marketing, even after the drug is on the market. So we're involved in those three areas. So as you can begin to see, there's a lot of work within the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, around quality for a number of different drug classes, drug products, and across the life cycle of those drugs as well. So our job does not end once a product gets to market. The other things that we do within the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, on this diagram, we're going to start with, at 3 o'clock, which is assessment. We get involved in reviewing the applications that come in to the agency itself around all these drug types. Now, we focus on the quality piece of it. We do not get involved in the clinical aspects of that. That's handled by other offices, so we really just focus on the quality itself. We get involved in inspections, as Dr. Cavazzoni had mentioned a little bit earlier. We do that in some cases on our own, but in most cases we usually join the inspectorate as well when we do those inspections. We're involved in surveillance. We need to surveil the industry. We need to know what the state of quality is of the industry itself. Why do we do that? Well, very simply, the reason why we do that is we're looking for trends within the pharmaceutical industry, quality trends, that is, and if there are issues that we need to address, we try to mitigate them sooner than later so that they don't become issues to the point where we then run into either drug shortages or recalls. So we really try to mitigate them sooner than later. We get involved in research. I'll give you a little idea of what research actually means. It does not mean that we just do research for the sake of research. Obviously, it's focused around quality and informing both our assessment as well as the inspections that we do. And then all of this kind of brings us to the top of the diagram, which is the policy and the policies we put in place, guidances, regulations, things like that, to really govern and to oversee and to work through the industry or work with the industry through those guidances. So what is OPQ, how does OPQ regulate quality? Well, we get involved both before the application is approved as well as after the application is approved. So when we talk about before the application is approved, that's pre-marketing work that we do, as I mentioned previously. So what do we do in this area? Well, we assess how the applicant develops, manufactures and tests the active ingredients. That's the active, that's the drug itself, the active therapeutic ingredient, as well as the final drug product. So what do you mean by final drug product, Mike? Just to kind of level set for everybody, final drug product is the tablet, capsule, pill, ointment, cream, gel. The finished product that you actually utilize is how we define drug product. When needed, we'll address whether the product is sterile, because we do deal with injectables, we deal with IV-type products, things along those lines, so we need to make sure they're sterile. When needed, we will address whether the drug has the appropriate rate and extent of absorption after administration. So again, to level set, what do I mean by that? You take a tablet, you swallow it, goes into your stomach. What happens is that the drug's got to be released from that drug product, and it's got to be absorbed from the stomach into the bloodstream. That's absorption. We look at the rate at which that drug is absorbed. How quickly does it get into the bloodstream? And the extent, how much of it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. Sometimes not all of it will get absorbed, but that's understandable and that's expected in some cases. And then we assess whether the proposed facilities are appropriate. These are the manufacturing facilities, so we will make sure that they are appropriate to manufacture the product itself. When needed, then, we may also have on-site inspections for those particular products as well. Because people may tell us, this is how it's manufactured, this is the way we do it. Trust but validate, so we will go out and inspect to make sure that indeed that's the way they do it. So we also get involved, as I mentioned, in post-marketing activities, which is beyond the application approval. So we develop standards and policies. As Dr. Cavazzoni had pointed out, these are science-based, and I think Keegan also pointed out, science-based, risk-based as well. You want to make sure that the benefit outweighs the risk. We also conduct research, as I mentioned before, to do what? To actually support the development of science-based quality policies and standards. So the research we do informs the assessments we do of the application, but it also helps us then to set the standards and policies that we put in place as well. So that's the type of research we do within the office. We oversee quality throughout the life cycle. I mentioned that before, from development, pre-marketing to post-marketing, by assessing changes proposed after the application is approved. Sometimes manufacturers will come in and say, we found a more efficient way to do this, so they will submit a supplement that comes in. We need to review that to make sure that the quality standards are still there for that particular product itself. So we will review that, and then we will give the approvals to move forward on that. And then we monitor the state of quality for all regulated manufacturing sites and drug products. As you can imagine, that's a formidable task for an office to be able to do. So what do? We develop a risk ranking of all manufacturing sites. Obviously, the ones that have the higher risk of quality issues are the ones that would get a higher priority in terms of the inspections that we do. So one of the questions I always get asked, Mike, are generic drugs just as good as generic drugs? And the short answer to that is yes, they are. Why is that? Because what you can do, or what you take a look at, what I'm trying to show on this chart, is that the quality elements we use to evaluate brand name drugs are the same quality attributes that we will, or the same quality elements we will evaluate for a generic as well. So there is no difference. We use the same standards. They're reviewed by individuals within the same office, within OPQ. It consists of drug substance, drug product, the manufacturing process, the facilities, the microbiology as well. The clinical part, again, is not the focus of today's presentation, so I'm not going to get into that. But when it comes to the particular issues around quality, they are the same standards. We review the same things, whether it's a brand or generic. A little bit of understanding in terms of the magnitude of the work that we do within the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. We have about 1,300 people that are within that group, so have pity on me. It's a rather large group to manage. On average, within a year, we will review 20 biologic applications, about 200 new drug, 300 investigational new drugs or INDs, and 4,000 generic drug applications. Doesn't mean they all get approved, but we have to assess those. So all of that is done. There's roughly about 7,200 assessments we do within a year. That's done pre-marketing. Post-marketing is about another 7,000 supplements that we need to look at as well. So again, we do pre-marketing assessments as well as post-marketing. Even though the product's on the market, we do not stop assessing or monitoring the state of quality for those particular products as well. So moving along, the state of pharmaceutical quality. One of the things I mentioned is we need to understand the state of pharmaceutical quality within the pharmaceutical industry. So we need to surveil that particular industry on an ongoing basis. So we continuously monitor the quality of all CDER or human drugs, not necessarily animal drugs, or veterinary drugs, but human drugs, are the ones that we continuously monitor. We now publish a yearly report or snapshot. Dr. Busey will give you a little more detail around what this entails, so I'm not going to go into the details right now. But that snapshot provides an objective assessment using quality indicators to determine the state of pharmaceutical quality within the industry itself. So we go out and we continuously monitor those sites. Stakeholder input. One of the reasons why we're having today's forum is because we make decisions in the name of patients and consumers and not drug companies. You may read in the trade press, you may hear in the news, and some of you may even think that we are too cozy, as people like to put it, with the pharmaceutical industry. We regulate the pharmaceutical industry. Our focus within Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, I can only speak for my office, but I know all of this is true throughout all of the FDA. Patients and consumers are the ones that we really make the decisions for. And we need to understand how patients and consumers view and relate to pharmaceutical quality. It's one of the reasons why we're here today, because we make decisions on behalf of patients and consumers. We need to understand how patients and consumers view the quality of those pharmaceutical products. So we need to have that better understanding. One of the things we've done is we've teamed up with WebMD to be able to send out a survey so we can get feedback in terms of how patients, consumers, physicians, healthcare providers, pharmacists, nurses, things along those lines view pharmaceutical quality. Dr. Fisher will give you some understanding of that survey a little bit later this morning, so I'm not going to go into those details, but some of the things we found were rather eye-opening for us, because as we regulate in this industry, as we make decisions for patients and consumers, we need to understand how they view these particular things. So Dr. Cavazzoni had also mentioned the shortage issue and the shortage report that was sent out there. Again, I'm only going to focus on the quality piece, which is the second bullet of the root cause, which is that we do not recognize and reward manufacturers for their quality systems. You talk about automobiles, you talk about electronics. They get rated by these independent organizations about the quality and about the standards that they use and the products that they make. We do not do that in the pharmaceutical industry. And we really want to start maybe thinking about doing that and implementing some ways then to incentivize and to share more broadly the quality of these companies that actually manufacture these particular products. Enduring solution is the second bullet, is a rating system, as I mentioned, and as Dr. Cavazzoni mentioned, is to incentivize the quality and the understanding and the sharing of that information with a broader audience, with the public at large. And then the third bullet under enduring solutions, I just want to point out that we also need to look at a reliable supply chain. And we're fortunate enough to have the CEO of Civica here today, which is Martin Van Trieste, who will talk to you about some of the ways to ensure a reliable supply chain of drugs so we don't get into shortages moving forward. So he'll provide you with a little more detail around that. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that we also need to modernize the manufacturing of pharmaceutical drugs. The technology we use today, for the most part, goes back, is roughly post-World War II technology. It is that technology that is currently used that lends itself to some, if not many, of the quality issues that we see as these products are manufactured. So to get around that, we need to modernize and advance and push forward the manufacturing of these pharmaceutical drug products. A lot of industries have advanced in their manufacturing. Take a look at the automotive industry. Take a look at the electronics industry. Pharmaceutical industry sorely lags behind these other industries in advancing their manufacturing technology. So one of the things we've done within OPQ, the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, is to put an emerging technology program in place which encourages and supports the adoption of innovative technologies to help address and mitigate some of those quality issues that are created by the actual manufacturing itself. So what is advanced manufacturing? Just so that everybody has a rough understanding, we define it with 3 points, which is a broad definition. Well, there's a broad definition of advanced manufacturing. The first one is innovative manufacturing technology, which kind of seems like a no-brainer, that can enhance drug quality. Again, the key point of why we're here today, improve reliability and robustness of the manufacturing process to be able to sustain the supply chain of the drugs that are currently out there and that are being made, and increase the access to medicines for the American public. So that's one piece, is the technology. Second part are novel dosage forms for delivery systems to improve drug delivery and targeting. I'm not going to get too much into that, but I did want to highlight that this is part of our definition. The diagram you see in the middle on the bottom is actually a 3D printed tablet. So what you can do is you could actually, using a 3D printer or 3D printing technology, to be able to print individualized dosage forms to ensure that each then dose or each product actually has the amount of drug that it's supposed to have. So mitigating some of these quality issues that we see in the industry. And then the third place is novel analytical tools, which can improve product quality testing, process monitoring, while the products are being manufactured. So all of this comes together and becomes the way we define pharmaceutical or advanced manufacturing. So why is advanced manufacturing important? Why is Mike standing up here, telling me about all these things? Because it can help address the underlying causes of quality issues that we currently see in the manufacturing sector within the pharmaceutical industry. It facilitates new clinical modalities. Again, I'm not going to get into the clinical aspects, but I do want you to realize that this advanced technology can give us precision and individualized medicines as well. And then it improves manufacturing efficiencies, which can include robustness as well as increasing supply chain flexibility. So all of this really does drive the need to get into this advanced manufacturing within the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Cavazzoni showed you this slide. There's a number of tools that we can utilize, because a lot of folks always come back to me and say, you know what, Mike, just do more inspections. That'll take care of all the quality issues we have. You know what? We can't do that. The time, the resource, the money that it takes to do that, it's just not feasible, even with 1,300 people in an office. So there are other tools that have been put in place that we utilize to be able to drive quality forward and increase the standard of pharmaceutical quality within the industry. And all of this then comes together to improve patient access without sacrificing quality to those patients. So in conclusion, what I want to do, yay, Mike's almost done. One of the things I want to do is to highlight that Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, we are the quality unit within the human side of drug products. We do work with two other offices, the Office of Compliance and the Inspectorate, which is called the Office of Regulatory Affairs, to come together to form that one quality voice. And what we try to do is we try to learn and understand and make our decisions based on patients. So the concept of patients, although I know sometimes people think we're these pointy-headed bureaucrats at the FDA and we don't quite understand patients, but you know what? We are patients too. We are consumers as well. So we want to make sure we have quality products on the market and that we're able to have and ensure the supply of those products to patients and consumers, which are us as well. So with that, I want to thank you for the privilege of your time, and now I'll turn it back over to Dr.
Thank you.
McClellan.
Thanks very much, Michael. All right, great. Thank you both for those framing presentations. We do have some time now for questions, and if you have a question, I think the easiest thing is to raise your hand, and we have a crowded room, but we'll try to get the mic to you as quickly as possible. So here and over here. And we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. Thank you.
Hi.
And let us know who you are if you don't mind.
Okay. My name is Stephanie Skipper. I'm an independent consultant in industry, and I have an idea regarding quality that impacts the R&D space. I'm not going to ask a question about that now, but you had mentioned submissions as structured applications, and I was wondering if that applies to the INDs as well, or if you're just talking about NDAs and ANDAs and BLAs.
So, for now, we have actually focused on ANDAs, solid oral dosage form, but the roadmap for this new system or this new approach is to ultimately expand to the evaluation of all applications, again, for the quality section.
And I could add, one of the reasons why we chose ANDAs is because if you saw the volume of work that we do, the largest volume is around ANDAs or generic drug applications. Right. So we're trying to address that piece first, and then we will roll it out subsequently to the other areas.
And I noticed you were looking to address drug shortages through the increasing the number of generics that are coming out.
Yep.
And my thought is to increase the volume of new products that are coming into the market by addressing quality and R&D stages, which makes the IND very important to me.
Yes.
So nodding heads about a bigger role potentially in the IND phase around drug quality.
Yeah, and we will get there. It just, again, it takes time. We've got, as I mentioned, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We have only a finite number of resources, so we had to start somewhere, and usually the work is tried there. That's right. And yeah, even though I look older than that, but yes, I am only 5 years old.
Okay, over here, I think.
Morning. My name is Mark Walsh. I'm the corporate head of pharmacy sourcing for Health Trust. I'm actually happy to hear about the quality kind of rating system being proposed. At the November 2018 meeting, I asked a question about why don't we rate manufacturing facilities kind of in the same way that CMS does for hospitals. And so since then, we've been working on kind of evaluating supply chains and things like that. And so what I would ask for consideration is to look at it as a rating on a product level, because rating manufacturing sites is good, but it doesn't tell the whole story because you're not looking at the API manufacturers, the component manufacturers, and then you've got CMOs that complicate it even further because this entity is contracting with that entity to make the product. And so aggregating all of the nodules, like all those nodes together to create a product level score, so I can look at it and I know this product has a 9 out of a possible 10 because each one of those manufacturing plants that supply that product or that build up to make that product have been evaluated, and that's the aggregated score. And that'll create a level of transparency for the consumers because that's an easy to understand process, because most of the time they don't know what manufacturing plant that comes from. And if they know that, they don't know what's behind the scenes, where the API is coming from and things like that. So it's been a way that we've been looking at it to try and make it more easy to communicate rather than just doing it at a manufacturing plant. So it's just a comment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more details, thoughts you want to provide about where the rating system is headed or the current thinking at FDA on that?
Well, I mean, the rating system right now, you know, we've proposed it through our drug shortages report. We're still trying to work through that. We do want to work through that with, you know, the industry as well as with patients and consumers, and one of the reasons why we're here today. So we're really trying to get some input and feedback about that before we just jump right into it. And then we also have to figure out how is it implemented, how much of it can we share, so on and so forth, because some of the information that we're being provided or that we have access to is commercial confidential, and we cannot share that publicly. So it's something we need to work through. We need to think really carefully about how we do that. But I appreciate that feedback. We struggled as well trying to figure out, is it on a facility level or product level? We've gotten some pushback when we talked about product level. So, you know, we've got to really try to figure out what makes the best sense and what brings the most value to patients, consumers, and then some of the individuals that are within the supply chain so that they can make their assessments as well.
Great, thank you. I'm back over here.
All right, Scott Knorr. Officially today, I'm the Chief Pharmacy Officer of the Cleveland Clinic, but as of May 1st, I'll be the CEO of the American Pharmacists Association. Couple thoughts related to the inspections and citations at the Cleveland Clinic because of low quality and issues we've had with anti-rejection drugs not working for patients. You know, we tested levels and we determined that it was from specific generic manufacturers. And we've created a dashboard where we look at all the FDA inspection reports and we collate that information. We'd be more than happy to kind of share that with folks, but it's a major problem that we've seen with our patients. The other part is clearly transparency. With the DSCA, we've done a good job on the tail end of that. However, on the front end, where the API comes from is completely behind the curtain, and we don't know where that is. Right now, as coronavirus is raging across China and on our shores, we don't know which API for which drugs is made in China. This could be a major problem for drug shortages. So I think the transparency in the supply chain and, of course, the being able to rate manufacturers are both fantastic ideas.
Thank you very much. Over here.
Hi, my name is David Light. I'm the CEO of Valisher. And just to comment real quickly, I definitely think that quality scores absolutely could be based, especially if we work with industry on chemical quality and all the way down to product level. But just wanted to, I thought it was quite interesting that in Dr. McClellan's opening remarks, right away he was mentioning ranitidine, which has obviously been on the forefront of, I'm sure, many people's minds here, but I didn't hear it mentioned at all in the rest of the discussions. And I do think that there is some level of perception, at least in the media and elsewhere, about some of these very visible quality problems not getting perhaps enough seriousness or urgency from the agency. And Dr. Cavazzoni was also mentioning about how other countries, such as Switzerland and those around the world, have the capability to do a mandatory recall on non-controlled substance drug products. And Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro did just reintroduce a bill in January on the Recall Unsafe Drugs Act to exactly give that power to the FDA. So my question is actually a very specific one. Do you have any comment or specifically support this particular bill? And if not, if there's technicalities in the bill, do you generally support the FDA having mandatory recall power on unsafe drugs?
Particularly from manufactured in countries where there is not you don't have confidence about their recall power.
I would say, yeah, in general, in terms of the various drug products, I don't think that these laws made a differentiation, but be happy to take any caveats.
Thoughts on that, or on some of these recent issues like ranitidine in particular?
So, there's a lot. Sorry,
and,
I can't see you.
The microphone, sorry.
You're
Both
behind.
use the
You're
microphone.
behind,
Yeah.
strategically
Yeah, that
located
makes it
behind the
better.
podium. So there's a lot of questions within that question, and I'll address your question on the bill first. I mean, we really are, we cannot comment on that aspect, but we are always interested interested when engaged by Congress. Obviously, we are always responsive, and we're always interested in providing input when we are asked to provide an opinion on bills or other activities within Congress. So. When it comes to the nitrosamines, we have exhaustive activity within FDA, led by the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. This is an emerging issue that is really tied to two things. The fact that these compounds or these impurities are very widely prevalent in the environment, including many foods, including water, and so on. And the fact that we now have analytical methods that allow us to identify even very small amounts of these impurities in drugs. And we know that there are multiple ways that nitrosamines can be insert themselves into the supply chain or the manufacturing process. So what we are doing now is really taking a very systematic approach to working through this problem. We are doing a lot of testing. We're working with manufacturers to ask them to do a lot of testing. And we're also working very closely with our international partners because, as I mentioned earlier, the supply chain is very interconnected. So you may have the same manufacturing facility that develops active pharmaceutical ingredients and then goes through multiple formulations that are available in some countries but not others. And so we really have to address this as a global community. And when it comes to global regulatory community, when it comes to recalls, we work with manufacturers and ask them to voluntarily recall the drug when we identify or they identify an acceptable level of nitrosamines in drugs. And for manufacturers generally comply, they also are. We've had manufacturers who have voluntarily withdrawn or recalled their drug even before FDA ever, approached them. They do it very quickly. So we are getting the drugs that have an acceptable level of nitrosamines off the market. But obviously, we realize that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, more globally, and that we will continue to require substantial investigation and resource on the part of both industry and FDA.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for one more for this session. Again, we'll have more time in the next session, too.
Hi, Michael Gagno with the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. First, let me start off by saying I'd be a huge fan of transparent quality ratings for our manufacturers. However, we heard Keegan mention the report from her team earlier on that there are economic factors associated with shortages. And I'm curious if there's been a study or if there's consideration, if there's specifically sterile generic injectables, there are instances where there's one manufacturer or there's 2 or 3 manufacturers. Has there been any consideration on the impact that a quality rating might have on the resiliency of those limited availability sterile injectables? In other words, if one manufacturer has a rating of a 6 and everyone shifts their purchasing to the rating of 9 and all of a sudden the 6 can't stay in the market, they don't have the resources to improve, not condoning the action, but I think it's a reality that needs to be considered. Has there been any consideration about the impact on the economics with a quality rating system?
And that's part of the thing. As I mentioned before, the whole rating system is something that, we've just started recently looking at, but that is one of the aspects and one of the things that we need to look at as well. Because obviously we don't want to now then start decreasing the number of suppliers, to your point, as everybody moves to these higher rated manufacturers. So it is something we need to look at.
Yeah, I would ask you, too, to maybe save that thought for the next session where I think we'll have a chance to get into these issues a little bit further. But to keep us close on schedule, these are great comments. To keep us close on schedule, I'd like to thank Patrizia and Michael, and we're going to move on to our second session. Thank you all very much. So we're going to go right ahead. If anyone needs to stretch their legs, please do, but we're going right ahead with our next session on the state of pharmaceutical quality. For this session, we're going to discuss the current state of pharmaceutical quality in more detail. That's obviously already come up this morning. And we'll also go over some results of surveys that FDA has conducted assessing patient and provider perceptions related to pharmaceutical quality. So I'd like to ask our next presenters to come on up. Cindy Busey, who's Director of the Office of Surveillance in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality at CDER, and Adam Fisher, who's Associate Director of Communications, acting in the immediate office of the Director of the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality at CDER. We're also going to be joined for this panel, and I think you all might as well come up now too if you want, for a couple of opening commenters. Michael Gagnon, who's the Director of Pharmaceutical Practice and Quality at the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, and Martin Van Trieste, who's President and CEO of Civica RX. So with that, I think we'll start off with Cindy, if you want to come on up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, I'm going to see if this... Oh, this is me.
There we go.
All right. Good morning. I'm excited to be here and talking with all of you about the state of pharmaceutical quality. I am the director of the Office of Quality Surveillance, which sits inside Mike Kopcha's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. I don't want you guys to have to read this slide, but I'm just putting this up here just to give people an idea of the complexity of the supply chain between manufacturer and the patient. I think this came from the Wall Street Journal. But even before the manufacturer, which is shown at the top, the little brown building there, there's several things coming into even that box that aren't even on here, such as active pharmaceutical suppliers, component suppliers, ingredient suppliers, et cetera. And so the supply chain is very complex, and as somebody just mentioned during the Q&A, you never really know what country things are coming from or what facility things are coming from, et cetera. So it's kind of difficult to keep your eyes on all that. For us, the Office of Quality Surveillance, our actual vision is that we will continually monitor and provide the state of quality for all regulated sites and products. So that's what we're hoping to do. It's a big job, as you can well imagine, with the supply chain that is in the United States. So what kind of information do we have to actually look at to try to decide where we stand in terms of surveillance? The number one thing that most people think about is the actual facility inspection data, where the Office of Regulatory Affairs goes out and assesses a facility and determines whether they're complying with good manufacturing practices or not. We also have quality defect reports, and these are anything from MedWatch reports, which consumers can put in themselves, or physicians can put them in as well, and to say whether they found a problem with a product. And if it's a quality defect that's found, it's sent to my office. The clinical issues stay with a different office. There's obviously recalls for quality issues. We have consumer complaints. Some consumers don't go to MedWatch. Some just call the FDA office and that may be in their city or something and report things. So those also will come to us. And then the industry itself is required to submit a quality report. If they get complaints from consumers, they're required to submit them to us. Field alert reports are the main one that come to us that we review, thousands of those a year as well. We have drug quality sampling and testing surveillance that we do, where we decide every year what products we're going to test, and we go out and pick them up and test them. And this is depends on what questions we're trying to answer, et cetera. Sometimes that surveillance testing is based on what we're seeing in the quality defect reports. Sometimes it's based on a question we're trying to ask and answer about the pharmaceutical industry, et cetera. So we'll have different projects under our sampling and testing program. We obviously have all the application data that comes into our office. And we actually also try to keep our eye on external data. There's a lot of things out there about, as Mike mentioned, we interact a lot with foreign regulatory authorities. We take a look at their inspection reports, or they may getting alerts as well that we try to keep our eyes on. There's also public information. We look at things like even, I would say, business data, sometimes information about whether firms are merging or breaking apart, et cetera. We can try to throw that into our models and see if it links to anything about quality. There's also social media. So as a lot of companies are doing and people are doing, we try to scrape social media. Can social media predict a recall? Do we start seeing signals in social media before we might see something in our quality reporting data? So we're trying to do those kind of models to see if there's anything that we can use out in public as well to try to predict what's going to go on. So with all that and with all that data, what we try to do is characterize the sites that we currently have and the products and figure out what we have in our inventory and how we need to keep track of it. And then we assess the quality of that and then proactively try to identify quality signals. If we can intervene before a recall or before a shortage, that's the ideal situation. So I just wanted to, I think both Patricia and Mike mentioned Office of Compliance, which we work closely with, as well as the Office of Regulatory Affairs. We in the Office of Surveillance, we're constantly looking at signals and we're looking at the need for firm engagement, but we don't get involved at all in enforcement. If there is something happening that we feel where a company is not following the good manufacturing practices, or we feel they're potentially doing something illegal, et cetera, we move it over to the Office of Compliance. So we don't do enforcement in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. So what is it that we're actually taking a look at? I just want to give you an idea of the numbers that we're talking about when we talk about surveying the facilities and the products that are currently under our purview in the Office of Quality Surveillance. You can see we have there's about 6,000 manufacturing sites. 2,000 of those are medical gas, as you can imagine, across the country, because that's something that needs to kind of be point of care. And then 4,000 are non-medical gas, and that's your typical generic and innovator and over-the-counter type manufacturers. And you can see that slightly more of those are foreign than domestic. And this includes not only active pharmaceutical ingredients, but also finished dose and repackers, labelers, testers, et cetera, are all within that 4,000. So what does that come out to? If you look at the number of products at all those facilities, you can see 35,000 unique active pharmaceutical ingredients and 120,000 unique finished dosage forms. This is just a breakdown. You can see half of those facilities are finished dose, 49%, and then another 29% are the actual active ingredient, and then the balance is made up by the rest of the manufacturing that it takes to create your drug. You can see there's 347 sites in China currently, and I think that came up during the Q&A is what do we know about China? Obviously, we're taking a close look at China right now. 476 in India and 1,455 in the rest of the world. So with domestic being 1,700. So when you actually look at product type, you can see the biggest piece of our inventory is actually non-application products. So these are the products you might think of, a lot of them are over-the-counter. Some over-the-counter are application, but a large number are not. This also includes like homeopathic products as well. We also do surveillance on those facilities. And so then you can see that the next biggest chunk are the firms that make both new and generic drugs. A lot of people don't realize it's not a new drug and a generic drug. There's a lot of facilities that actually provide either active ingredient or finished dose for both new and generic drugs as well. So I also want to let you, so here's kind of, when you talk about what's the state of pharmaceutical quality, here's the percent of the manufacturing facilities that had an acceptable inspection final outcome, and this is as of August 2019. Every day the inventory changes, so when I give you a number, that's kind of why these dates are on here. For instance, in last year, fiscal year 19, our most volatile industry was the non-application industry, and we lost about 15% of the facilities, and we gained an additional 7% of different facilities for those non-application type products. So for every type of product, every day somebody registers a facility, and every day somebody takes a facility off of our registration, so that's no longer in our inventory. So we're constantly looking all the time at what's coming into the market in the U.S. and what facilities may be deciding to leave the U.S. market. So you can see that the best inspection outcomes comes out of Europe. At 98% of the time, we get a good inspection outcome out of Europe. And lowest is being India, 83%. But you can see the majority of facilities in all parts of the world actually are under acceptable manufacturing in terms of their inspection outcome. Those that are not are all with the Office of Compliance, so they are working with them to either remove them from the marketplace or to get them turned around and to be acceptable. Sampling and testing, I just threw this graph up here just to, as an example of some of the work we do. We do a lot of testing and research, both, as Dr. Kopcha talked about. We do testing, pre-market testing. We test products before they get approved, and we do quite a bit of post-market testing as well. In the Office of Surveillance, we're the ones deciding what products should be tested post-market. And then we also do quite a bit of for-cause testing. A lot of that comes out of the Office of Compliance, either through potentially a whistleblower, or maybe we have some intelligence on something, we'll do for-cause testing. We often see a lot of more failures on for-cause testing. For surveillance testing, we rarely see failures when it comes to analytical lab testing. We see failures at less than 1%. This is an example of a study we did with over 300 samples from around the world. In this particular cut, these were the immediate release samples, 252 of them, 17 different active ingredients, and they all passed USP market standard criteria for both dissolution and unit dose uniformity. You can see a little bit of the spread there. The dotted lines mark the acceptance criteria in the USP for these particular products. So you can see that we have a lot of information in the Office of Surveillance, Quality Surveillance, to make decisions on where to inspect next or what to sample next, et cetera. And obviously, the public has less information, but I did want to put up here a list of what you could find if you wanted to look. We do have an inspections classification database. Once again, as a consumer, you probably don't know where a drug is potentially made. It's not often on the label, or on the label will be the distributor, but not necessarily where it was manufactured. Drug shortages are also publicly available. Recalls, obviously, are publicly available. And then we also have results for the drug quality sampling and testing program posted. The other thing is the FDA does a lot of social media. So if you're not friends with us on Facebook, I recommend it. You get the minute we release something, whether it's about the rididine and or whether it's about recalls, et cetera, it'll show up on your Facebook page right away. And that's true for foods or drugs. So you can find out that your flour's been recalled at the same time you might find out about your drug. So I do recommend you friend us on Facebook. We do Twitter stuff too, but I don't do Twitter, so I don't really understand that. But I can talk about Facebook. And just to remind you what we're dealing with, and most of these I just talked about already, which is that, my office, what we really are trying to do is not only figure out what's the state of quality, try to find innovative ways to do that, new data to pull into all of our models. We'd like to engage stakeholders. We do academic research, et cetera, to find out what's the best way that we can do this risk-based surveillance we have so many resources, we can only go to so many places for inspection, we can only test so many products. What's the best way to do that? And so we're always open for new ideas as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam.
Great. Thanks very much, Cindy.
So I'm going to be speaking a little bit about some stakeholder surveys that we did. And I realize we've used the term stakeholder a lot today. And I was just thinking back to when I first interviewed for my job at the FDA. They kept talking about stakeholders. I was interviewing over the phone, and I actually Googled it because I had no idea what this word meant. It's not a word that normal people use, but I think it really reflects, seriously though, but I think it really reflects the sort of broad span of people that are impacted by the things that we do. Right? And so this stakeholders term is really a good catch-all for us to use to describe that. So anyway, with that in mind, a couple things I want to throw out there before I start. My background is a chemical engineer. I'm not a statistician. So a lot of the things that you'll hear me say about the surveys are not necessarily supported by statistical calculations, p-values, and things like that. So please consider it more observational and more start of a conversation rather than statistical. I'm also not going to be speculating on why we found the things that we did. I think in many ways that's why we're all here today, to discuss the state of quality and why people see it this way. And I think, I'd be remiss to not take advantage of this opportunity to do a quick survey of the room, because I know we have so many different stakeholders here. So if we could, just by a show of hands, how many people here are physicians? Okay. And you may fit multiple groups, so feel free to keep raising your hand here. What about pharmacists? Good number of pharmacists. What about buyers? Payers? Regulators? Press? All right, now how about patients and consumers? Right. Point being, that's all of us, right? We are all the patients. We are all healthcare consumers, and this is really a message that we've been trying to enforce, not only with the public but also with our own staff. As Mike said, we did this push to encourage our folks to remember that we are all patients too, and we collected all these great stories from some of our staff, ranging from someone who was hospitalized, a reviewer hospitalized with H1N1 that survived, others didn't, the whole way down to someone's son who was in one of the original clinical trials for recombinant insulin. And you hear these stories, and it really brings home why we do what we do and the impact that it has. So, let me get into some of the details of our survey. So the one thing that I just want to point out here is when we reached out to figure out, what do patients think about quality, and also what do physicians think about quality. We did this in sort of mid-2008. So the consumer survey started in May, and then the physician survey started in September. And we did both of these in partnership with WebMD, as you heard earlier in Mike's presentation. And just some quick numbers on who we got here. So we got over 3,000 unique visitors to WebMD. These were both desktop and mobile users who were accessing the site. 62% of these users were under 50 years old. About 12.5% self-reported as Hispanic, and 14.4% self-reported as Black. So that's the consumer side. Physician side, there were 650 physicians, and this was done via email invite. There were some criteria for who qualified. For example, you had to be over 26. You had to have more than 5 years post-residency. They were compensated somewhat for their time with the Amazon gift card. And over 55% of the people that responded had over 15 years in practice. And by design, there are about 50 each of cardiologists, dermatologists, endocrinologists, orthopedics, and rheumatologists to make sure that we were capturing specialists alongside of primary care physicians. So I'm not really going to get into the weeds of the numbers so much here, other than to, again, reinforce some themes that we saw throughout these surveys. So the one thing that we asked was about the overall perception of drug quality, right? So we asked people to rate the overall quality of drugs. And this is the percentage of people that rated it as very good or excellent for the different classes. So prescription brand name, prescription generic, over-the-counter brand name, and over-the-counter generic. So consumers are in blue, physicians in green. And what we saw was that physicians actually rated the quality of drugs higher as compared to consumers in almost every category. So it was almost surprising to see also, though, that physicians had more tendency to associate brand name drugs with superior quality than generics. So although they rated everything of higher quality, there was more of a difference when you looked at the physician ratings there. So then we looked at the consumer side of things, and we looked at consumers under 50 and over 50, and there's a pretty good split, again, between these age groups. And we looked at those folks that rated overall drug quality as good or excellent. And this surprised me personally, I have to say. We saw that the consumers over 50 were more likely to rate drug quality as good or excellent as compared to those under 50. And you might expect, a corollary to that is that the younger cohort was more likely to give a fair or good rating to these types of drugs. And again, this kind of challenged my own biases going into this, where I was sort of picturing my old grandfather, sitting in his chair complaining about drugs, but it turns out that the older population tends to have a more favorable view of drug quality than younger. So then we asked something to both physicians and consumers. We said, do you believe drugs manufactured in the U.S. and sold in the U.S. adhere to strict manufacturing standards and regulations required by the FDA? The first thing that jumps out to me, these look almost exactly the same. So physicians and consumers answered almost the exact same way And sadly, nearly 3/4 of consumers and physicians do not believe or are not sure that the drugs manufactured outside the U.S. adhere to these standards. So then this is where it gets a little interesting for me, because we get into clinical treatment. We get into impact on patients. So we asked the physicians about the frequency that they write dispenses written. Now I'm running the risk of explaining dispenses written to a bunch of pharmacists and physicians, of which I am not, but bear with me. A dispenses written is essentially specifying a brand name drug when a generic drug is also available, okay? And so it turns out that nearly half of the physicians always, sometimes, or often write dispenses written. And an interesting observation was that when we looked at the specialists, significantly more specialists were doing this as compared to primary care providers. And of those specialists, it was particularly high among cardiologists and endocrinologists. So an observation maybe to drive further discussions on this topic. And then we asked, why do you write dispenses written? Right? So this is just the physicians that said they do write dispenses written. Far and away, the reason physicians reported writing dispenses written is because patients requested them to do that, right? So patients are kind of driving this decision making. So then I think an obvious question to look at here is, how are you making this decision? What factors do you have available to you that are indicative of drug quality? And so we threw some factors out there to both consumers and physicians, and this is the percentage that somewhat or strongly agreed that these were indicators of drug quality. I'm not going to go through them all. They don't matter that much, but I did want to point out a couple. You know, the real sobering one to me was that nearly 1 in 4 physicians and nearly 1 in 3 consumers think that advertising is an indicator of drug quality. Okay, so let that sink in for a second, right? And then another just interesting observation here when it relates to specialists is that, as you might guess from the previous data on specialists, they were much more likely to say that brand name was an indicator of quality versus the primary care providers in this section of the survey. So we also were curious to see how people viewed the FDA's role in regulating quality. And again, we threw a laundry list of things out there to see if people knew what we did and sort of the boundaries of what we don't do. And again, I don't want to go through the full list, but I did want to hone in on just 2, right? So I'm showing the results for physicians, but they were nearly the same for consumers. And 1 in 10 people believes that the FDA manufactures drugs, and 1 in 10 believe that the FDA sets drug prices. We don't do that. We don't do either of those. If you walk away from today with nothing else, please know the FDA does not set drug prices or manufacture drugs. So there's an opportunity clearly to educate more. Testing was another area where people had a limited knowledge of the FDA's role. As Cindy mentioned, we have a regular sampling and testing program at the agency. So then we get into drug shortages, and this is also where it gets a little interesting. So we asked the consumers if they've ever had difficulty filling their prescriptions due to a drug shortage. And about 1/3 may have experienced difficulty filling a prescription due to a drug shortage. And of those that had, they were much more likely to have used a prescription generic over the last 3 years than a prescription brand name drug. Again, not entirely surprising based on some of the things you've heard from Patrizia and Cindy already today. And then also the consumers who experienced drug shortages tended to rate the prescription generic drug quality lower than those who hadn't. So that was an interesting observation based on their personal experience with shortage. And so now I started with a little survey of the room, and I'm going to try to end with one here as well. And so this is the last question on both surveys. And we posed to the survey taker one of the difficult questions that we face, right? So there are times when the FDA may take steps to maintain safety and quality standards for a drug, which can potentially cause a supply shortage. And we asked them to use this scale to indicate where you feel the FDA should stand on this trade-off. So a 0 would mean you should make decisions just based on constant availability, and a 10 would mean you should just make decisions based on quality and safety. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to move across the numbers and raise your hand when I get to the number that you think the FDA should be, and put it down when I get past that number. I'm curious to see what happens here. So who's at 0? 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So obviously, I couldn't count fast enough, but I think we were right around where we got for both physicians and consumers. They landed right around a 7. So physicians were at 7.0, consumers were at 7.1, and I'm reporting the mean here. And you can see that the shape of the response curve was wildly different. I won't get into that, but it's interesting to me that we ended up at the same place. And then one final point that I want to make related to the survey is when we just looked at consumers, and we looked at the consumers who had been impacted by the shortage and those who hadn't been impacted by a shortage, there was a clear split in their ratings based on what they'd experienced in the past. So those impacted pushed more towards constant availability, and those that hadn't been impacted pushed more towards quality and safety. So that tells you something right there about how people view this. So let me summarize some of my key takeaways. 3/4 of consumers are uncertain that the drugs manufactured abroad adhere to strict US standards. Most but not all knew that FDA neither manufactures drugs nor sets drug prices. And the experience with shortages influenced the perceptions of quality and the FDA's role in regulating it. For physicians, we see that half believe that drugs manufactured abroad are of lower quality. That's a slightly different question than the one on the consumer side, but about half. 1/4 believed a drug advertisement is an indicator of quality. Half, sometimes or often write dispenses written, and 3/4 of the time this is because the patients have requested them to do so. So hopefully you hear about some of this and you realize that now there's an opportunity to build on this. There's an opportunity for the FDA to better understand our stakeholder sentiments and to help facilitate conversations between patients and physicians about the quality of their drugs. And I thank everyone for being here today to take one of the first steps in doing that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Adam. And next, we're going to have some brief initial reactant comments from Michael Gagnon and Martin Van Trieste. And I think we'll start with Michael.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here and represent the provider perspective and, of course, the patient perspective. As noted, we're all patients. Initial reactions, looking at the first part of the presentation, talking about MedWatch, talking about recalls, complaints, social media, those are, in my opinion, too far downstream. They're too reactionary. At that point, the problem's already occurred. It's been mass distributed, and we as providers and our patients are dealing with those issues. You heard my colleague, Scott Knorr from the Cleveland Clinic, talk about a dashboard that they've created. And the Cleveland Clinic is a massive enterprise. They have resources to be able to set this up. Imagine critical access hospitals that are trying to manage those same supplies of medications and determine the quality of those products. And I think the point of emphasis I want to make is this is not our job. We are not trained to determine which products have the quality suitable to provide to our patients, right? We are there to provide bedside care, to provide medication counseling, to take care of our patients. We're not equipped to go in and read Form 483s and warning letters to determine, well, should I be ordering this product or that product? That is not our job. And so when it comes to the amount of information that's available, it's not adequate, it's not transparent enough, and it doesn't allow us to have confidence in what we're telling our patients. We're trying to combat myths associated with vaccines. We're trying to combat the perception of big pharma and mistrust. And these recalls and these issues do not help, and it erodes the trust in our healthcare system beyond just the products. It erodes the trust in providers as well. So when I think about some of these statistics that we've seen, and we're fighting what people are seeing on social media. We're fighting what people are seeing in advertisements. If they're having that much of an influence, we're having to counteract that as it is. So that's my initial reaction to the data and to the points that have been presented.
Thank you. And next, turn to Martin.
So I was asked to come here today, I think, not because I am the CEO of a company, but I have 35 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, mostly in manufacturing and quality. I ended my career, last 20 years of my career, as a quality person. So I think I'm here to talk about quality. It's interesting to me that you never asked someone in manufacturing what they thought about these questions. Because the response you would have gotten, I think, would have been really surprising. Because if you ask, is China making as good a product as you make in the United States? Everybody would tell you that's not happening. It's not true. Now, there are good companies and good people in China, just like there are bad companies in the United States. There's a lot more bad ones in China. I've been to them, right? When you go there and spend 3 days in China to do an FDA inspection and everything's in Chinese and you need a translator, that means you're really doing an inspection for a day and a half. I know the FDA is full of hardworking, dedicated people, and to go to China is a hardship, and I appreciate everyone who's done that, but I've been there, and you cannot tell me that the Chinese produce as good a product as we produce in Europe and the United States. And I'll tell you, ask the manufacturing guys, you would see the numbers would not agree with the numbers you had. These are manufacturing and quality experts. I wouldn't buy a product made in China unless I have no choice. When you take an antihypertensive or hypocholesterolemia drug, how do you know it's working? That little white pill and that little white pill, how do you know they're the same? How do you know they're different? You don't. And if we don't fix what's going on in China and India, everybody, the consumers, are going to lose confidence in the medical system. And when consumers lose confidence in the medical system, they're not going to take medicine anymore. And what's that going to happen to society? So I'm just saying, guys, we can't put our heads in the sand about what's going on outside Europe and the United States. It's a different world. They have different cultures, different morals and ethical systems. And you read a book like The 100-Year Marathon about China, and their whole system's about taking pride in cheating somebody in a business deal, right? They take pride in it, right? It's described in the book in great detail. Well, how do we do business with them when our system's designed to keep honest people honest and trust most people? We're at a disadvantage when we do that. And I think that's, if you source from China, if you use from China, or you try to inspect from China, we're at a disadvantage. And we just have to admit it, or nothing gets better, or nothing gets better. And the FDA is stranded, right? They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, and it makes it hard for them. But we as consumers can make a difference. If we demand change, if we demand domestic sourcing, then things will change.
Okay, so a couple of opening comments. Thank you both. We do have time now for comments and questions from people who are here. So just as we did with the last session, please put your hands up and we'll try to get a microphone, get one of the microphones to you.
My name is Harry Lever. I'm a cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm really indebted to Scott for doing such a good job, because it's very helpful when I write a prescription that I know that I have a pretty good chance that the patient's going to get something that works. I do not write prescriptions DAW, but I write the prescription specifying the manufacturer that I want. That's different, because I've had experience looking at patients, and I know that certain manufacturers don't work. And I think that we've got to be very careful about it. It's not that difficult. You watch enough patients and you get an idea there's something going on. And what I do, I have no way of testing drugs. That wasn't possible. But what I did do is, when I noticed a problem, I would take the patient and put them on another manufacturer, keeping the dose the same. I would not raise the dose. I'd just let's see what happens if I just change the manufacturer. And many times it works. Not all the time, because you don't know, is it the patient or the drug? And I tell people, when you have an algebraic equation with two unknowns, it's very difficult. So it used to be, when I'd write prescriptions early in my career, I didn't worry. Now I worry a lot. And what I do is I keep that dose the same when I make the change. Again, it doesn't always work, because it is the patient, it is the problem. But we are really in a problem now, and I agree with Martin, a lot of stuff coming out of China I am very worried about. And I think we've got to be very careful about that, and we've got to really go after that. And I guess I have a question, though. How many times do you allow a violation? You know, if you go in the state of Ohio and you drive your car and you get so many points, you lose your license. What does it take to lose and prevent a company from coming into this country when there's so many violations?
So the inspection process is if you have official action indicated, then as I mentioned, it goes to the Office of Compliance. And so they are then, depending on that's when compliance works with the firm. They may put them in import alert if they're a foreign firm. They may work, if they feel that the violations are workable, they may work with them to see if they can improve the whatever the violation may be. So it depends on, as with driving, you can get many parking violations, but so many moving violations, and you might get your license taken away.
And there's some companies, repeated violations. You see, and I'm not going to mention their names here, but there are multiple companies with multiple violations, and you say to yourself, why do we do that?
Just to repeat for people who are online, and since you have a microphone, so a question of, I think you're talking about more serious violations, maybe less, any policy. Yeah.
People put out. How many 483s does it take to say goodbye?
Is there a 483 limit? Is that something?
There's
that
no
could be-
formulation. So every inspection is looked at and rated, and then we work with the firm to improve the violations. That's
And
what
is that
happens.
something it could be part of the
Or if they're-
scoring system that we were talking about
Potentially
earlier?
moving forward, we could look at something like that.
Okay. Question back here?
Go ahead, Adam, did you want to?
All right.
Oh, sorry,
again,
Adam, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I was just going to make a bigger point that, as Cindy pointed out, the supply chains are incredibly complex, and there's very little visibility into them. And I think a lot of times people assume their drug comes from somewhere, but they really don't know. And in fact, some of the things we found out when in talking with patients is that they often don't even know if their prescription is a brand name or a generic, right? There's so little insight into what's going on. So that's a consideration to keep in mind, too, when we talk about this.
And sorry, Scott, if I can say, as complex as the system is, when I go to order a drug, I have two pieces of information, and my friends at the FDA are probably tired of hearing this, but I have a price, and I have whether my wholesaler has it in stock. That's all I have to make a decision. That's it. And potentially if it's on a GPO contract. Those are the two pieces of information I have. Now, if I've had experience, as you mentioned, or Scott and the Cleveland Clinic, they have their dashboard, I might have a little bit more information and insight into what I'm buying, but otherwise, that's all I have as a consumer, as a purchaser of products.
Thank you.
All right, Scott Knorr, Cleveland Clinic, and soon to be American Pharmacists Association again. First of all, I'd like to say you guys have an incredibly difficult task at the FDA. Thank you for what you do. I very much appreciate it. And that really hit home to me about 5 years ago when we opened Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And when speaking with physicians in the region, there is a huge concern about generic medications. And our drug costs in Abu Dhabi are much, much higher because of the reluctance to use generics. I was at first shocked with that because we have, even with the issues we've got, our drug supply chain is much safer. But there, where they have many, many products from India and China, it is a serious problem. And of course, your inspection data sort of says it's worse in those countries, but it's much worse. My biggest concern there is that pharma certainly loves that. There's nothing more they love than a DAW prescription, and I think that they're talk, and they're pushing this agenda that generics aren't safe, and I think that's horrible. Generic drugs are the only thing that has helped us keep costs down in this era of runaway egregious drug price increases. So anything we can do to ensure that society understands that these are safer is good. I would also say that DTC advertising, direct consumer advertising, is horrific. And our pharma friends will say that is free speech, and it's not. As you know, it's only been legal since 1985, and in 1997, when the FDA loosened things up a little bit more, that allowed this, which clearly from your survey, that is where people are getting data about what's good. So we got a lot to do, I think, in advertising, clearly in inspections, but also just in sending the message that the generic drug supplies is overall relatively safe, and that it is the biggest thing that helps keep healthcare costs down.
Yeah, thank you. Any comments in response? Some head nodding. Yes, so next, right here.
Hi, I'm Michael White with the University of Connecticut School of Pharmacy. I mean, I think that the big issue that we have in terms of complexity is that drugs are based on laws are either AB rated or they're not AB rated, and if they're AB rated, then you can automatically substitute them, right? So whatever it is that you have in the pharmacy at the time, if it has that rating, it gets automatically substituted. The information that you have about the quality of the drug is non-existent. But the FDA has been telling people for years and years and years, and pharmacists have been telling patients that have been coming to them with concerns for years and years that this is the same. This is going to do the same thing for you. And it was all built on trust. But it wasn't something that was validated. There were marked differences in the way that different companies in different countries were being inspected. If you give people 12 weeks of advance notice before you show up and you only have a couple of days to do the inspection, you're not going to get the same kind of inspection as if you have unannounced visits and you have longer inspection times. And if you see things that are more egregious, you automatically have the ability to extend those times. If we have a rating system and the rating system gives you 1 to 4 stars, but it's still AB rated, how do you put that on a prescription bottle so people would know? And if you have one that's a 4-star, but it only has limited capacity to make medications, people are going to have to use the 1-star and the 2-star just based on capacity, right? So right now there's very, very limited capacity in multiple drug classes. So if you only have capacity with the 4 stars, even if you're going to give them some additional you're going to give them some additional money for having that rating, you're going to tap out and you're going to be forced into that lower overall rating. And then the last thing is, how are you going to do generic ratings if you're not going out and doing the inspections to the same degree? How do you know if you're seeing a 4-star? Because you trust the information that they're sending you? Ranbaxy's already shown that you can't trust always the information that they're sending you. They'll send you false information, and if that's all that you have, if it's not backed up by anything else or at least the threat of everything else, then you fall into the dilemma that we're in now.
Thank you. Next we had right here.
Hi, Michael Delatorre, CEO of a software and data analytics company called GovZilla. We look at the FDA and help life sciences companies determine trends and what the FDA is focusing on and what other health agencies are focusing on. So the first thing I'd like to do is give the FDA some credit. They have increased the number of international inspections like tenfold over the course of the last decade, and they've done a lot to find that. And they have many very talented inspectors who have done a lot of good work in India and China, guys like recently retired Pete Baker. So one of the things that I would like to ask, though, is how is this whole notion of data integrity and then quality system and quality scores. So as I said, we run analytics on a lot of this, and as many as 75% of facilities that were discovered having no quality unit or a massively inadequate quality unit and insects in the lab and things like that, and then data manipulation, testing into compliance, did not receive a warning letter. They just received a standard 483. I was just wondering, what is the rationale for not giving a warning letter to a facility that doesn't have a quality unit?
Warning letters are issued by the Office of Compliance, so which I don't think is here. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Tara wanted to comment on that or not, but,
Yeah, Patricia, if you'd get
or
a microphone.
Patricia might.
Yeah.
You know, the decision as to whether to classify an inspection as official action indicated or to issue a warning letter or an untitled letter or other sort of enforcement action is really depending on the cumulative assessment of the severity of the issues in a facility. And it's done on on an individual basis, but we also take into consideration, the history of inspection of the facility. So there is no there isn't a clear-cut answer that I can give you today, but I can tell you that there are a lot of considerations going into these decisions. And I also wanted to clarify something that Cindy had said earlier. We have a tool when it comes to foreign manufacturers, which is import alerts. And that actually gives us the authority to bar entry of that drug into the country. And so for situations where we see serious quality issues, we don't let the drug into the country. So, okay.
And I think another important thing to keep in mind, as Patrizia said when we started, inspections are just one tool that we use to regulate quality. And they're a very visible one because a lot of the results are made available to the public. But there are, about a dozen different tools at our disposal. And when you put them all together, that's when it comes into focus more clearly than just focusing on any one of those tools.
Over here.
I'm Arash Tabastani from NYU. Question is for Cindy. How confident are you that the methodologies and the equipment that you use in the dissolution testing, the surveillance testing and analytics is cutting edge and recent and really the best?
Well, we have, when it comes to surveillance testing, we typically run USP for those in terms of dissolution tests and assay and impurities that are outlined in the USP monographs for a given product. And those are validated methods. And so we typically use that. When it comes to development of methods, for instance, for the recent nitrosamines, all those methods needed to be developed because they weren't, very low levels that we're looking for. So in that case, we had to use more advanced analytical equipment, which our labs are equipped with. And we put those methods on our website so others could see exactly what instrumentation and methods they would need to also detect nitrosamine. So depending on the problem we're trying to address, it'll depend on the method or the analytical instrumentation that we use. But we do have the ability to use advanced analytics when we need to. And more typical surveillance testing, we'll use dissolution and HPLC, UV vis that's outlined in the USP.
Thank you. Next question back here. And thank you all for being efficient in your comments and questions. We're getting through a lot of input here, which was absolutely our intent. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Leborick, and I'm an Assistant Director of Pharmacy at The Ohio State University, Wexner Medical Center. And I wanted to expand upon the comments made by Martin from Civica RX, where he mentioned that he really would, given the data, avoid China, which I think is really interesting when we look at the data that Cindy presented about the results of the audits and inspections done. China and India had the lowest percentage of passing rates of those audits, but I think one thing that was stated in another comment, but I think it's really important to consider together, is that in those countries, the FDA is required to provide advance notice. And so you really have to take that data with the eye of the Hawthorne effect and look at if somebody said, I'm gonna come look at you and make sure you're doing everything right, and even then you're still doing way worse than everyone else, I think we need to ask ourselves what's happening when we're not watching, when we don't tell them that we're coming. What are they doing then? When I think about, okay, let's say hypothetically I wanted to avoid China, how would you even go about doing this? It's actually unclear. There's no transparency. Where is the drug coming from? Where is the API coming from? If you look on the label of your pharmaceutical, sorry, wasn't me. If you look at the label on your pharmaceutical, you can maybe see the name of the company that imported the drug, but it doesn't actually tell you anything about where it was made. If I look at the shirt that I'm wearing, I know where it was made, and I probably would value the quality of my pharmaceuticals way more than the quality of my shirt. And so I think we all need to ask ourselves, as citizens of this country, where are our values, and why is some information available to us and why is some not? And I think in light of what's happening in China right now related to the coronavirus, this is just one example of one pandemic. But if you think about potentially a matter of national security, what if there was some sort of intentional biochemical warfare or something else that required the use of pharmaceutical, and the country that was after us is the only country producing the antidote or the cure? What controls would we have in place then? Thank
Okay,
you.
so a lot of questions in there. Thank you for getting through so much of that quickly, including back to supply chain transparency, inspection, quality, and conditions. And in thinking about this, and if you all also want to talk about some of the trends that you're seeing in China and India, if any. For example, China's recent joining ICH and attempting to increase the resources they're putting into pharmaceutical regulation. So, Adam, looked like you want to start. Martin, comment too.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, right, about transparency. Civica plans to be extremely transparent. So on our label, we will print the manufacturing company, the location to city, state, and country. And on our website, our members will be able to see where the API comes from. Can't fit the API, all that information on a little bitty 1 ml vial, but we can put it on the website. And so we're doing that. And we're hoping we're going to lead by example, because it's going to require a legislative change to require that information to be put on the label. And then I also just wanted to mention
Martin, before you leave that, do you have a sense that back to our earlier discussion about the economics, and you're obviously aiming for the 3, if not the 4-star, the top end manufacturing and distribution and supply chain, probably not going to be as cheap as some of the others. Do you have a sense of the economic impact?
Well, we're a nonprofit company, so I don't have shareholders or equity investors. Yeah. So I have a different playing field, right?
So it could be higher, and that's okay for your members. Do you have a sense of how much of a cost?
Our manufacturing costs will be definitely higher, but our members will pay the same cost, because I'm not trying to make a profit, right? So I think that's the difference. But and we're not targeting to have 4 stars. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to provide quality medicines that are always going to be available and affordable to our members, right? And the patients they serve. The score could be what it is. But, scorecards, I'm a big believer in scorecards. And when Janet first proposed it many years ago at the FDA, I wrote a letter to the FDA encouraging on the right track. And I don't think it will cause long-term drug shortages, because what will happen is companies that excel will expand capacity to take care of the business, and companies who don't excel will go out of business. That happened in all kinds of industries. So I'm a big proponent of it from a patient perspective, from a pharmacist perspective, and from a manufacturer's perspective. And when I worked at big pharma companies, they were like, Martin, you must be crazy. What happens if we get a bad score? I go, then we deserve a bad score, right? And we need to fix it. And so it's sometimes an irrational fear about having a scorecard. But everywhere in life, we have a scorecard. My wife rates me every day. She's probably my biggest critic, right? She rates me every day. I mean, every place you go, you get a scorecard. And I don't know why our industry is afraid of it.
So
Martin,
can we go to LinkedIn to see your daily score?
Yeah, Martin, I hope your ratings are going okay. It just seems to keep coming back, I guess. Adam, you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say something about the T-shirt analogy. And I think this is, again, something to keep in mind when you talk about the complexity of the supply chain, right? It's a simplification of the problem, because your tag may tell you your T-shirt's made in America. Where were the threads made? Where was the ink made? Where was the cloth made? Right? In a drug, that's very important, right? You have API. Do you need to know where each excipient was made? Do you need to know all the solvents and where they came from that were used in the process? Right? It's a puzzle that kind of never ends if you go down that path, right? So at some point, there has to be a line of trust, and we either trust or we don't.
Yeah, and that's perfect because I think, look, romaine lettuce recalls in a matter of weeks we were able to trace back to Yuma, California, or Arizona, or wherever it is. Sorry, I'm a pharmacist, not a chef. But how long? We have blockchain data available to us, right? Why are we not using blockchain to be able to find every one of those components you said, whether it's an ingredient or not, whether it's glass, whether it's the ferrule? Why aren't we putting all that? We're getting into serialization of our products, right? All that stuff can be built in to some sort of blockchain data that goes into that. I really wanted to quickly go back to another point Stephen made, because I don't think it's just geopolitical. I don't think it, sure, we have to worry about intentional, and we've seen intentional with heparin a little over 10 years ago, and I'm sure it wasn't what the scenario you're talking about, but it was an intentional contamination. So it's certainly something that's feasible. But natural disasters, outbreaks like we're seeing, infrastructure issues, geopolitical, trade wars, et cetera, we can keep listing them. So there's a reason to be worried not just about the quality of what's coming out of the plants, but the consolidation of the location where these plants are located.
Great, thank you. This has been a great discussion. I'm looking at the clock, we are out of time for this panel. So I would like to thank the panel for their comments and for a really stimulating, a frank and thoughtful discussion. So in closing, I do want to emphasize a few points. If you don't mind, I'll be quick, so just stay put for a minute. Clearly, a lot of important issues here related to pharmaceutical quality and what FDA can do about it, and what all of us stakeholders, now that Adam knows what the definition is, can do about it. Very clear to me that a wide range of people, not just buyers and sellers and manufacturers, but especially patients, pharmacists, and clinicians care deeply about these issues and have some very thoughtful ideas about how they can be addressed to make sure that we have high quality pharmaceutical products without breaking the bank. And I would just, as a former FDA commissioner, I have to just again iterate, for thoughtful ideas like this, it's really helpful to have legislative authority, resources, and attention to international collaboration, or where you can't do that, at least strong international engagement, and all of that takes effort. So we covered a lot of important topics today, including some real concerns showing up in surveys, and maybe we need to do that one of the pharmacists and manufacturers as well, but concerns about the quality of manufacturing of drugs abroad. We've talked about some new steps that FDA is taking in these areas, and some potential for even further steps around topics like ratings and creating a stronger economic case for quality manufacturing, and some innovative approaches to doing that. I would say that Duke Margolis is very committed to supporting the FDA in these efforts. We'll be working with all of you to better address these and other questions. But for today, before we adjourn, there's several people I'd like to thank. First off, each of our speakers and panelists for their excellent contributions to today's discussions. And would also like to add to that all of you who had comments, who came, and who have been working on these issues. This is really important, and the FDA clearly cares about addressing the kinds of concerns and opportunities that you all have highlighted. I'd particularly like to thank the FDA staff for their commitment to addressing pharmaceutical quality issues, and for their time and effort in planning this meeting. So that special thanks goes to Michael Kopcha, Ashley Bohm, Dustin Price, and Adam Fisher. Would not have been possible to have this back and forth open discussion without their efforts to make the meeting a success. And then a final thanks to our team at Duke Margolis, Adam Kretsch, Adam Otten, Haley Sullivan, Sarah Sapsiri, Patty Green, and Elizabeth Murphy for all of their efforts to put this together. We would like to hear from you about further ideas to address these important issues. For the materials that were produced for this meeting that you received here, they'll be available on the Duke Margolis website, and you can stay connected to our work in this area and others through our website and other linked social media accounts. We even do Twitter. So thank you again for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.